Teresa, and welcome back. So today I would just like to talk about traveling during this unprecedented times of COVID-19. So just to start with a bit of a disclaimer that if you really don't have to travel, then maybe you can defer your travels to a later date because still there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of risks and a lot of complexities that come with traveling during this pandemic, and the pandemic is still real. Just to think about your individual circumstances. For example, if you have some medical problems, or if someone is elderly, then maybe they can defer the travel. But we know that for sure there are those that cannot defer their travels, maybe because they have to travel for school, for work, or you're going to join your family, or something is long overdue, or maybe you're just pent up and you need a holiday. I would also want to say that for those who are very adventurous, maybe this might still be the best time to travel because a lot of countries are opening up. And with that, there are a lot of deals, there are a lot of opportunities that are coming up. And maybe if you feel like you can take a risk, I think this also might be a good time to travel. So today, I just wanted to dwell on some 10 tips that you could use and to take for consideration during this period as you travel, or as you plan your travels. So the first thing that I would say during this COVID period is plan. I know that for every international travel, we normally plan a lot, but right now with COVID, you not only have to plan, but you also have to think of a contingency plan. So late last year, I traveled for work to Sweden via Harare in Zimbabwe. And from there are bits of lessons that I picked. For myself, for example, when I talk about contingency planning, I planned to spend 2 nights in Harare, and on the day that I was supposed to be leaving, because I was traveling as part of a group, we had some challenges with some members of the group, so we were not able to leave. So that meant that we had to stay in Harare for 2 extra nights than planned, because we could not get immediately another flight that would leave Addis Ababa, because we were flying through Addis Ababa. So that meant another extra 2 nights, and you can imagine if I had not planned for those 2 extra nights, if I had not thought about it. So there's need for a lot of contingency planning around this period of COVID. Even now, you also have to think about things like, what if I test positive along the way? Because I mean, you can still leave your country when you're COVID negative and you've had your PCR test, but then you could get sick along the way, or maybe be subjected to a test at some border or at some transit area, and then it turns positive. Because I mean, there's no absolute guarantee that your test will still remain as it were before. So in that case, what do? You need to think about that even as you plan. Also, in terms of contingency planning, you need to work out all those scenarios. You have to think in terms of if I need to stay longer, where I am going or where I'm headed, how will I do that, where will I stay. Also consider that still you may leave your country when you're tested negative, and then there's a possibility that you could be subjected to another test in another country which could turn positive. So you always have to even psychologically have that in mind, that things may not be as they were when you're leaving your country. You could fall sick and be asked to test. So what if you need to quarantine? Where do you have a contingency plan for that? So those are the kind of things that you really need to think about right now, even as you plan for your travels. The other thing is around the timing. So for example, myself, when I was leaving the country, normally when I leave the country, I just check in online, and then I go to the airport about 1 hour to my departure time. You know, I never like to sit in the airport and wait, because particularly if the travel is a long one, and I know I'll sit in other airports during the transit period. So I tend to just go at the last minute and just drop my bags and go straight to the gate and board the aircraft. So this time when I went about 1.5 hours before, and I thought that was really a good allowance of time. But when I arrived at the airport, there was a long queue outside because of the current COVID provisions. So everyone has to be checked individually. They are maintaining a social distance. So it takes about 5 minutes or so for one person to move in. So the queue was quite long. And I remember standing there for 1 hour, close to an hour. It was really frustrating. And then when you go in again, go through the baggage area, and then you get into the KQ desk. So again, there was another queue, and I remember I was looking at the time and I had maybe only 40 minutes to departure time, and I knew that I'm gonna miss this flight. I was like, I'm definitely going to miss this flight. So I just had to use some negotiation to ask the people that were in the queue that please excuse me, and then at least they allowed me to go to the front. But not everyone has that confidence to be able to do that. So by the time I arrived at the counter, and then the lady checked me in very fast, and then she was like, okay, your flight is already boarding, so you need to run. So I was running through the immigration, and of course they take their sweet time, and then I go up the stairs, and if you know JKIA, the way it is, there's another security screening area upstairs, and that's even worse. But luckily for me that someone from KQ came around and was calling for people that were going to Zambia or Harare. So at that point, at least I was fast-tracked and I was able to catch the flight, but it was quite stressful. So you really need to plan, go to the airport, I would say the classic 4 hours before for your international flight, to be able to avoid missing your flight. And also make sure that you've checked in online, because if you've checked in online, at least even if you're going to miss your flight, you can always abandon your baggage if you don't have anything important inside. What I would like to also highlight is that you really need to look at the COVID restrictions before you travel, and you need to keep checking that every time. Even let's say you finalize your travel a week to the time you're supposed to travel, but even before you leave your country, you really need to check and recheck again the COVID restrictions. Why I say this is that a lot of the restrictions are changing, and they're changing so fast. So today this may be a provision for the country you're headed to, but then maybe 24 hours before you travel, there might be a change, and that means that you also have to give the airline your contact number so that they keep giving you notifications, and you keep looking at those notifications. So for me, for example, for Zimbabwe, I needed a COVID test done within 72 hours. So I did my test like a day before, and luckily I was able to get the results within 2 hours, and I was able to travel. And then I was going through, the transit was through Addis Ababa, Bole Airport. Luckily for Addis, they don't have any specific requirements, so it was quite easy, and that's why we booked Ethiopian Airlines. And then for Sweden, again, lucky for me that Sweden does not have much restriction in terms of COVID. So there was no much requirement for COVID testing or any other requirement while going in. But now for me, the challenge was that I needed to come back home, and we were trying to squeeze the duration of the trip to make it as short as possible, so that I'm able to come back when my COVID test is still valid. So that meant that I had to get a test before leaving the country. Then the day that I was supposed to leave Harare, I had to get another test. And you can imagine, then I went to the airport and we were not able to board the flight, so I had to stay for 2 extra nights. And that meant that the day I was leaving again, I had to take another COVID test. So that was 3 tests within a number of days. So it's very important that you really think about the restrictions, not only of your country. So what do I require to be able to exit from the country that I'm in right now? And then what do I require to be able to enter the country destination where I'm going? And then also look at what do I require in transit. So particularly right now, a lot of people are avoiding traveling through Europe when going, for example, to the United States, because of the requirements to be tested in transit. So maybe you're better off like going through Doha or going through the UAE. So those are the kind of things that you really have to consider around this time, and keep, again, as I said, keep checking those restrictions, keep updating yourself, give yourself some alerts so that you don't miss any change that may occur. The other thing that could also happen in addition to COVID restrictions is cancellation of flights. So again, you have to be aware that you could be planning to travel tomorrow, and then the flight just gets cancelled during this COVID, because sometimes they don't meet the number that the threshold that they need to be able to carry the flight. So keep checking, make sure you keep checking your emails, your SMSs, so that you don't get disappointed, for example, going all the way to the airport and then you find that you do not have a flight. Then the other thing that I'll talk about that you need to consider, particularly now as you travel, is the migration rules. So you really have to consider, where am I going and what are the rules at the moment, because also the rules keep changing, because a lot of the countries are are revisiting these requirements every now and then, depending on how the situation evolves. So you have to think about what do I need? What do I need a visa, and what type of visa? And sometimes maybe, like for me, I was going to Europe. Maybe you already had a Schengen visa, but then you also have to consider that at that time, for example, there was a ban on entry from certain countries. So is my country banned from entering the Schengen space? Yes, I already have a visa, but is there an existing ban? So like the time when I traveled, there was still a ban that was in effect. So when I was getting the visa, I had to also get a letter from the embassy that allows me to travel. So these are the kind of provisions you have to think about. So for example, are you an immigrant traveling for immigration? At the moment, are immigrants allowed to travel? Then also, for example, if you want to go to tour in some countries at the moment, they could be accepting maybe reunion of families, but they're not accepting tourists at that time. So keep thinking about this kind of provisions and this kind of migration policies that keep changing every now and then. Just because we are still in a pandemic, the 7 tip that I would give is that still you have to take precautions. I know that right now vaccines are becoming more and more accessible, but you still have to take personal precaution. So the simple things of keeping your distance as much as possible, wearing your mask, keeping the hygiene, having your sanitizer. Most of the airlines are giving sanitizers on board, and maybe some towels to sanitize. So you can utilize this, but also have your own sanitizers, have your own like sanitary kit while traveling, just to take your own precautions. And then what I would say, like for example, I transited through Bole International Airport. Normally Bole is crowded, and I was quite scared about going through there, but in the end it was the most deserted airport. Most airports are actually deserted during this period, so I don't think there's really like a big risk if you just take some common sense, but always think those personal precautions are still important. That you really have to be flexible. You have to be flexible, particularly with the bookings. So this is not the time to go to some dubious websites to book your travel, whether it's the tickets, whether it's the accommodation. You really need to use reputable sites. Why I say this and why this is important is because things can change. Your test could turn positive, your travel could be cancelled. So much could happen in a very short time. So if you had booked, for example, with a hotel that was rigid, then you really get into problems, and maybe you might lose some money. So you really have to think about the kind of tickets you're booking. Are they flexible? Is there room for cancellation? Is there room to travel later? Let's say you're not able to travel, something happens and you're not able to travel at this point. Is there room for you to go back and use that ticket or use that reservation at another time? So for example, for myself, who had to stay for 2 extra nights in Harare after booking my hotel reservation for Sweden, I was going to lose the payment that I would make for that. So what I did was to contact the website through which I'd booked. I'd booked through booking.com, and I also contacted the hotel, and they were able to hold my reservation and to tell me that it would be okay to arrive 2 days later without any penalties or any loss of some money. So that really worked out very well. So you must use sites that are reputable, otherwise you risk losing money during this COVID. But just to say that, yeah, a lot of hotels and the tourism sector, they're quite flexible right now during COVID, which means you're able to negotiate. So if you find yourself in a difficult situation or circumstances have changed, don't feel shy to negotiate with the service providers and to say, due to this, I'm not able to honor my part of the agreement. So that's something that you need to really think about. Important traveling during this pandemic is travel insurance. So as you remember, during the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of insurance companies were not accepting to cover COVID-19. So when you're traveling, particularly international travel, you really have to think of, what if I get sick? What if I'm exposed? What if I need to quarantine? What if it's in a hospital? Do I have enough resources, or do I have enough insurance that will be sufficient to cover my treatment and even repatriation if I need to be brought back home for treatment. So think about the insurance. I know there are people that could be having visas from way back and now you want to travel, but then you already have the visa, but then that doesn't mean that you just travel. You really must have a good travel insurance and check with them that they actually cover COVID. So that's one thing that you really need to take into account during this time. Then the other thing that I would also mention is that it's also important to plan around money during this COVID period when you're traveling. For myself, I'm someone that is so spontaneous, so sometimes I can just wake up in the evening, carry my bags, go to the airport, jump into a plane without even any money in my pocket. So I've done that a lot of times because I always have a way of adjusting and surviving, but then during this COVID period, I think it's quite risky to do that. You really need to think about money and how you're going to finance your trip. For starters, you need to have some cash on you. You need to have cash in the different currencies. For example, when I was transiting in Addis Ababa, a lot of the shops are closed, the exchange bureaus are closed, so you have to really think ahead in terms of what if I'm not able to get a place to exchange money, what am I going to do in that case? So it's good to already have different currencies depending on the countries that you're going to travel through so that you're well sorted. But in addition to that, right now, particularly during COVID, a lot of countries are not accepting cash. So for example, when I went to Sweden, even just to buy a coffee, you would not pay it in euros. I had a lot of euros, but I could not pay in euros. So everything required a card. To take the taxi from the airport, I needed a card. So you must make sure that during this time, more than ever, that you have a card that's functioning, that you've informed your bank that you're going to travel and that they've activated the card. And I would also recommend maybe it's good to travel with a credit card even at this time because of all those contingencies. So like in Sweden, they were not accepting any cash in any place. So I had to really use my card. Thank you so much for listening. Feel free to give your comments and your feedback. Looking forward to that, and